All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. Again, welcome. Thank you for attending this afternoon. My name is Matthew Menendez with White Plume. I am really excited about our webinar today. What we're going to be talking about is some very, very powerful data, some analytics that allow us to see into the revenue cycle, to see what's happening, to see where there are areas for improvement. And the thing that gets me most fired up about this is it means that there's opportunity for significant additional return on investment within the ExcellaSmart application that you're using today. That means there's additional opportunity to save your practice money without a new implementation, without a lot of change, without a lot of risk, and without a lot of cost. There aren't very many opportunities that we have to do that, and this is one of them. That's why I'm excited. I hope that you're excited about that as well. You know, if you look at what's been happening in our industry over the past 6 or 7 years, things have been very difficult in the meaningful use era, right? We've had a lot of change. All of that change is not necessarily positive. There's been a lot of burnout. When you look at technology and all the change that's been happening in the healthcare IT side, and I think this is an opportunity for a win. This is an opportunity for us to leverage technology. It's an opportunity for the administrative staff to be able to bring something to the physicians that's valuable for the practice and that makes sense. So I'm excited about what we're going to cover over the next 30, 45 minutes, and I hope that you'll find this valuable as well. So let me give you just a quick overview of what our agenda is, what I hope to accomplish today. First off, we're going to talk about what is advanced revenue cycle analytics. When I talk about that, what are we looking for? What are we trying to find? And then why is this important? So we're going to start with the big picture in mind. What are we talking about? Why it's important? And then what I want to do is jump in and show you some of the details that are available in these analytics, right? What we're talking about doing is it's some pretty sophisticated data crunching. We're taking the data that's in the White Plume Central database, comparing that to what's in the ePassport database on the back end, and looking at all the changes that were being made in ExcellaSmart. And then we want to turn that data into information so that we have opportunities to make improvements. And so what I'm going to do is I can't go through the whole analytics with you. We just don't have time to go through all of that today. But I want to share with you some early success stories. The clients that we've been working with this on, what have they seen? Where are the opportunities? Where are the additional savings? What's the time impact for their revenue cycle process? So I can share some of those success stories with you. They're different for each client. We can find some patterns, but they're going to be different for each client, and I want to show you a couple of different flavors so you understand what that might look like for you. Then we'll talk about some next steps. What do you want to do if this is something that looks interesting to you? How do you engage? How do we move forward from here? And then again, at the end, I'll make sure that I leave time for questions and answers. So if you're just joining us, welcome. Feel free to ask questions throughout the webinar today. Shelley will try to answer as many of those as she can. We'll also have some polling questions, and the last polling question will be for what kind of follow-up information do you want. So if you want to, we're recording the webinar today, so if you want a copy of the recorded version, or if you want the PowerPoint slides or update, kind of give me the quote, how much does it cost to do this analytics? You can ask that you can answer that in the last poll question. But let me go ahead and launch our first poll question just to kind of get your juices flowing when you start thinking about this. And the question is, when was the last time your ExcellaSmart users had training? We've had a lot of focus on the capture side for the past year and a half as we've made the transition to ICD-10. So the question is, have you done any training since you went live? If so, was that in the last 12 months? Was that internal training, or did you have White Plume come do that? Or if it was more than 12 months ago, again, was that internal training, or did you have White Plume come and do that? So all you need to do, if you've not done a GoToWebinar poll before, is choose one of the 5 options that best answers for your practice, and then hit submit, and that's all you have to do. It's pretty easy. So just to kind of give you an FYI what it looks like so far, it's pretty evenly distributed, about 20% across the board, maybe a bit higher on the last 12 months with internal training, but as people vote, the numbers tend to shift. So just to give you a feel for it, it's a pretty even distribution right now. So thanks for participating in the poll. It's always interesting to get everybody's feedback on that. So let me talk about when I say advanced revenue cycle analytics, what are we talking about? We're trying to dig deeper, not just look at denial rates, right? We're trying to look at what's really happening in the revenue cycle. How can we dig deep? How can we get better visibility? And specifically, one of the things that we're looking at are what types of changes are we making in ExcellaSmart? What are my users doing? What types of changes are they making? Are there any patterns between or distinctions between one user and another? What about from a provider perspective? Are there certain doctors that we're having to make lots of changes for compared to others? Trying to answer some questions like this. These are some of the things that come up that we want to ask of the data. What percentage of encounters are we touching? What are we having to change in ExcellaSmart? What changes are we making most frequently? Are there any patterns there? Are we making more changes to procedure codes or diagnoses? The diagnosis codes or modifiers? Which changes are we making most commonly? If I want to drill down even deeper than that, if I'm looking at my diagnosis changes, what are my most commonly added diagnoses? What are my most commonly deleted diagnoses? What are the mistakes that we're making that we have to fix over and over and over again? Is there a way to automate any of that? How many encounters are we processing every hour? How long is it taking my users to do that? Again, do I have some that are better than others? Maybe they're doing the surgeries rather than the office visits. Which users are making the most coding changes? Is everybody in sync there? Or are there some that are doing more than others? Which of my doctors requires the most amount of my revenue cycle time? And there's much, much more. These are just some of the top questions that we've been trying to answer with our clients as we drill down through these analytics. So when we start to get into detail, you'll see some of these questions starting to come out. But I want to make sure we talk about the big picture. Why is this important? What are we trying to accomplish with this information? And the first thing is we need better revenue cycle data. We need to be able to answer some of these questions. As we make the shift from volume-based reimbursement to the value-based world, we're going to have better revenue cycle information. We're going to have better data in order to streamline our processes, but also in order to be able to identify how sick my patients are, to justify how cost-effective my physicians are and the quality outcomes that they're delivering. We have to have better data in order to be successful. But it's not just about data. I'd make a distinction here between data and information. You know, we live in a digital world, and data is everywhere. Everywhere we look, there is data, but it's often sometimes overwhelming. There's too much of it. I can't use it to make decisions. What I really need is information. How do I take the data and transform it into something that is meaningful, that is actionable, that I can use to improve my revenue cycle outcomes? Because at the end of the day, that's what we want to generate, is better revenue cycle outcomes, to make sure that my claims are paid completely and correctly the very first time. And I want to be able to do that without turning my doctors into coders. Right? We don't want to make our doctors coders. That's not good for them, and that's not good for our patients. we have to be able to generate better revenue outcomes with the already stretched resources that you're dealing with right now. Okay, so how do we do that? How do we make Excel-Smart even better than how you're using it today? And as we start to drill down into this information, I want to put one thing in your head. There's always a trade-off. There's always a trade-off when you're looking at the return on investment that you get from Excel-Smart. And here is what it looks like in a graph. Let me explain this to you. The trade-off is speed and cleanup. The more cleanup work you have to do in Excel-Smart, the longer it's going to take you to work that batch. If I have a batch of 200 encounters and I've got to change 50% of them, it's going to take me longer to touch those 100 encounters in the batch of 200 than it would if I only had to touch 25% of them. And we've been able, through the work we've been doing with clients so far, to say this is what the average looks like across the white Plume client base. So depending on the percentage of encounters that you have to change in Excel-Smart, this is what our average client would be able to do as far as number of encounters per hour. That gives us a benchmark so that we can start to see, how am I doing? How does my client compare? What does that look like for us? And this is what we've seen so far. Each of those blue dots represents a different client, where we run these analytics to try to see how they stack up. And so you can see some people are making more changes than others. Some people are processing more encounters than others. And there are some practices who, even though they touch the same number of encounters, are able to do that much more quickly than others. So the question is, how do we leverage the best practices that we see across our client base that you have within your user set to make them more productive, so that we can generate better revenue cycle outcomes in less time? And I think the analytics and the examples I'm about to show you will give you some insight into how practices are doing that. So we're always trying to keep this in mind. That says, how do we make sure we generate the best revenue cycle outcomes in the shortest amount of time? We're not trying to cut corners. We're trying to find some operational efficiencies here. So let me show you a couple of examples. I'm not going to walk through the whole 30-page analytics report that we get at the end of this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pull 3 different examples from different parts of this analytics report so that you can see where other clients have found opportunities. Okay? Now the names have been changed to protect the innocent, but let me jump in and show you one example. So part of the analytics looks at the Excel-Smart changes that we're making on a provider-specific level. It stack ranks them high to low based on how many encounters the revenue cycle team is having to touch and manually change in Excel-Smart. And so when we were looking at this, one of the things that really jumped out to us is, I'm not going to pay attention to that one at the very top, because that provider only had 3 encounters during this reporting period. But when I look at the next 3, right, who are doing significant encounter volume over a short period of time, and I see that we are changing, making many more CPT changes for those doctors than we are for the others. And so that makes us ask another question. Why? What's happening? What's going on there? And what we discovered was that those 3 providers are subspecialists. And on their encounter form, there were some missing CPT codes that they needed, that they were using on 80% of their encounters. They were having to add that into the manual entry required section, which was flagging an ExcelisSmart user downstream to look at the encounter and add in the CPT code manually. And what that meant was more time, more clicks, less efficiency for the physician, and slower throughput for the ExcelisSmart user. That's not a good trade-off. But the analytics told us where to look for an opportunity like this. And we were able to drill down into the details, find that information, and what we did was we worked with them to create a new tab on their encounter form for those subspecialists that had exactly the information that the subspecialist needed, and that ended up saving the doctors, these 3 providers, 4.4 clicks per encounter. Right? I'm sure many of you have doctors who like to count clicks. Now, it saved them 6 clicks per encounter on the ones that actually had the CPT code, but that wasn't on 100% of their encounters. So it saved them 4.4 clicks per encounter, all day, every day for those doctors. And then it added efficiency for my throughput on my revenue cycle side that allowed the users to process a greater number of encounters per hour. And what I mean by that, it saved their revenue cycle department over 5 hours a week. That's time that can be reallocated to other functions. Maybe they need to look at the risk-adjusted coding. Maybe they need to do more E&M audits. But it allows that revenue cycle to be able to do more for the practice than what they're doing today, deliver better revenue cycle outcomes in a shorter period of time. That's one example of where we might find an opportunity in these analytics to make an improvement in the practice. Let me show you a second example. Different part of the analytics, but a place where something jumped out at us when we started to look at this with the client, and we thought there's an opportunity for improvement. We're looking at the changes that are being made and where the biggest opportunities might be. You can see that this practice is making a lot of diagnosis changes. But what looked particularly interesting to us was when we looked at this section, the gray section of other procedure changes. I said, what is that? That's much larger than what we'd seen at any other client. It stood out to us. And what we found out was that they were making nearly 900 changes a month, where their coders were re-sequencing CPT codes. The CPT codes were coming in out of RVU order, in the way that was coming out of their EHR. It was not coming in the right order, and the coders were manually going to fix that 900 times a month. And so what we said is, you know what we need to do? We can automate that. We can build in a script that'll handle that automatically on the front end every single time, so that my coders don't have to spend their time doing that. They can spend their time doing things that we can't automate. And so they were able to put that script in place, let White Plume handle that for them, and they saved 10 hours a week by taking those 900 changes and automating every single one of them. You can see they're able to get their coding done correctly, but they're able to spend less time doing it. Let me show you another one. Here's another example. Another part in the analytics report, again, this is sometimes over 30 pages long, and I'm showing you just a few of them, trying to give you a flavor for it, so we don't have a 3-hour webinar today. But when we looked at this one, the thing that jumped out to us was they're adding this diagnosis, that Z code, on 800 encounters. in a 2-week period of time. And what was happening when you got underneath it was this practice used a dummy CPT code to track their no-show patients. And when they had no-shows, in order to get that dummy CPT code to post to their practice management system, they needed to have a diagnosis attached to it, or else the interface wouldn't accept it. So when there was a no-show, the front desk employee would mark the no-show code, but they forgot to add the diagnosis with it. They had trained them to do that, but the front desk employees were busy. It's a very busy practice. And so they'd forget. So they had more expensive revenue cycle employees downstream manually adding this Z code over and over and over again every single day. And so we said, there's got to be a way to fix that problem. You know what we can do? We can build into that dummy code along with the CPT. Every time we use that dummy code, I want you to pull in this Z02.89 as the diagnosis code. That way we don't have to spend any more time to correct a problem that's going to generate zero revenue for the practice. Right? There's no claim that's going out the door. They're just doing it from a tracking perspective, and it's costing their revenue cycle valuable time every single day. They spent an hour and a half a day fixing that problem. We've got to fix that. And the good news is we can. There's a lot of flexibility that's built into AcceloSmart to fix problems like this. And now we have a tool that can give us better visibility into the revenue cycle to solve these types of problems, to identify these types of opportunities so that we know where to look, we know where the savings are. All right? The thing that I think is the biggest opportunity, and that we've seen in virtually every practice that we've done these analytics on, is leveraging best practices for your users. Another section of this analytics looks at my different users. It looks at their volume. It looks at their throughput. It looks at the types of changes that they're making so that you can see what's happening across your users. So you have the data that may tell you what you already know, but help you quantify it. Or it may open your eyes to something that's quite surprising. It's really interesting when we go over this information with clients and to hear their feedback on it. So when I look at this particular part of the analytics, let me show you what jumped out to me on this one. So when I look at their percentage of encounter change, I go, gosh, that's really, really high. That's really, really high. We would only expect people to be able to process about 50 encounters an hour if they're an average client. But look over here. I noticed that I've got a couple, there's those top two, top three. Not only are they outperforming the other people in the department, but they're outperforming the White Plume client average. They are doing a lot of work. Look at the total encounter volume. They're doing a lot of work. They're making a lot of changes, and they're doing it very, very quickly. Right? Maybe they've got doctors who are better coders. Maybe they're having to make fewer changes, but in this case, they're not. they have some best practices that we need to share with the rest of the department. Because let me show you what would happen to this particular practice once we're able to share those best practices across their team. All right, I'm going to simplify some of this data for us just so it declutters it a bit. Same 8 users, right? You can see the top 2 are doing that faster than everybody else. And based on the number of encounters that they're processing per day, you can see how much time they're spending in ExcellaSmart. Right? So, for example, user 2 and user 5 are spending about the same amount of time in ExcellaSmart, but user 2 is processing twice the number of encounters. So let's assume we're able to observe their workflow, understand what they're doing, how they're doing it, what they would recommend doing to their peers to be able to work at the same rate. How are you doing that, and how do we replicate it, right? And we're able to get everybody up to that 97 encounters per hour. What does that mean to that team? Well, that means instead of spending 23 hours per day working in ExcellaSmart, they're able to spend 13. That means they save 10 hours per day, 50 hours per week, every week, to be able to handle some of the additional work that's coming our way because of MIPS, because of value-based reimbursement, because of HCC coding, because of the shift from volume to value. Our revenue cycle departments have to be more efficient. And the good news is you've got a tool in your hands that is very, very powerful. And we want to be able to make sure that you're getting the most out of that. Let me show you what this means. If we're able to take a practice from the bottom point to the first point and go from below that average line to above it, that significantly improves their efficiency. And the analytics, the data, the information points us at where we should look. It shows us where some opportunities for better throughput might be. Where are the opportunities to automate? Where are the opportunities to build better rules? Where are the opportunities for additional training? Because that means moving from 100 encounters an hour to 200 encounters an hour may save 25 hours a week. And we found significant opportunity every single time we've done these analytics. And that gives us an opportunity for you to generate better revenue cycle outcomes and to get a better return on investment out of the software that you already have installed. That's what we want to do. You may not be at 30%. You may be changing 60% of the encounters. You're doing a lot of work behind the scenes for your doctors. We want to provide you with the data so that you can show them, number one, how well your revenue cycle is working, and number two, how you're getting more and more out of it every year. Right? We want ExcellaSmart to be more valuable for you in 2017 than it was in 2016. Now, I know I went through a lot of information. I went through a lot of different examples, but I wanted to give you a flavor for what we're finding when we engage in these analytics projects with clients. Here's what I would recommend as next steps. You need to think about, how frequently do I want to look at these analytics? How frequently do I want to review that? Is that something that I want to do one time and try to make some adjustments to it? We've seen some clients, the majority of folks settle on about a quarterly, once a quarter type pace. They think that gives them the time to gain the insights from the analytics, plan for where they want to make the improvements, and then run the analytics again so that they can measure their improvement and look forward to the future of what else do we need to be improving on. Right? We constantly want to be making that type of incremental improvement. So the reason why some people wanted to do that monthly, they want shorter cycles, but most people have done quarterly thus far. Up to you. But what we're trying to do is, number one, be able to look back and see where the opportunities are. And then number two, see the progress that you've made. So identifying the opportunities for where can we make changes to our form, where can we add in scripts to automate some of these changes, where do we need to tweak custom rules or custom scenarios, you know, where could I use some training and leverage some best practices to have the, you know, one of the White Plume implementation specialists come observe our process and share some of those best practices to get my user productivity up. Right? There is significant opportunity here, and I think the place to start is doing those analytics. That gives us the insight into the revenue cycle, gives us the data and the information that we can use to see where the opportunity is. Now, it takes us some time and some number crunching to do that and to be able to drill into that data. The pricing on that differs for different clients and different provider sizes, but just to give you a ballpark feel for that, you know, a 15 doctor group, I think the analytics on that is $900 to run that. So we've had different people that want to do that at different frequencies, obviously, based on where they are in their revenue cycle. But let me do this. I went through a lot of information. Let me hear from you guys just a bit. I'll launch our next poll question. Is when you think about this, when I'm talking about getting these insights out of the analytics, how frequently do you think that's something that you might want to look at? So the choices are never. You know, that's not something that we want to look at. I might want to do that once. Some people want to do that quarterly. Some people want to do it monthly. And if you're not sure, there's an option for not sure as well. Feedback so far today, just to give you an idea, most people are in the quarterly camp, with a few in the monthly camp, and even a smaller number in the one-time camp. We've got some not sures as well. So just to kind of give you an idea of where your peers are, our experience up until this point has been most people are in the quarterly camp. And that's what it looks like we are today. Nearly half of the webinar attendees today are thinking they might want to do that on a quarterly basis. Just to give you some feedback, and then there are about twice as many that want to do that monthly as want to do it one time. So there are some people who say, gosh, you know, if I can shorten down that cycle and get the information more frequently, I can make improvements faster. Some people like that, some people don't. So just to give you an idea of where we are so far. So thanks for participating in the poll. Hopefully that's helpful information for you as well. Okay, let me move to the last slide, and then we'll open it up for questions. Just to kind of summarize and go back over it, what we're trying to do is provide better revenue cycle data so you have visibility into the changes that you're making, who's making them, for which providers, what types of changes are we making in our revenue cycle, what's happening in Excella Smart. How do I transition that into actionable information so that we can make our revenue cycle better? Where are our opportunities? What are we doing really well? Where do we have room for improvement? Because if I can identify those types of opportunities and put those processes into place, I can generate better revenue cycle outcomes for my practice. And that's what we want to work with you on. How do we get fewer denials? How do we prevent a denial before it ever happens? How do we make sure we're capturing all of the revenue that we should be? How do we automate as many of these changes as possible? When it's something that happens every single time, can I automate it instead of having a coder on my staff review it and do the same thing every time? Right? That makes your coders more valuable as well. How do I generate faster throughput so that we can process 200 encounters an hour instead of 100? Because if I can do that, I can save time and handle additional things that come up as we make the transition from volume to value. All right, let me do this. I'm going to put up our last poll question. This one is a multi-select poll question. So if you want different types of follow-up information, you can select all or none of these. So if you want all three, analytics, link to the recorded version, and the PowerPoint, you can just click all three before you hit submit. If there's nothing that you want or need right now, just hit the nothing right now, and that's fine too. We will have the client account exec responsible for you follow up with you with all of this information. So it makes it easy for us to get everybody the information that they need. So just go ahead and lock those answers in, and we will get that information to you as quickly as we can. So thanks again for participating in the polls. I think that makes the webinar more fun. At least it's more fun for me. I get to at least have a bit more interaction rather than me just talking and you guys just listening the whole time. So thanks for locking in those polls. I'll give you about 10 more seconds. I'm going to close the poll screen so we can get back to it. So thank you for getting those in. Okay, I do want to try to leave some time for questions and answers. If we get done a little bit early, so much the better. Shelley, what type of questions do we have out there that are good for the entire audience?